We are continuing on, sort of, about image. You'll see, with a little twist. But before we do, I got to tell you something about Hannah's past. Her dark childhood. You see, you may have seen Hannah here and there, and she looks perfectly normal. You may not have realized by looking at her that she grew up without cable in the home. She had no cable and no video games in her house. I know you're thinking, how does a kid survive without cable or video games? She had to go outside. She had to make friends. She had to learn to play and use her imagination. I'll tell you, whew. Someone so deprived and having such a twisted, dark past, I don't know how I was able to make it work with her. Me, on the other hand, I did not have that kind of past. No, I had a healthy upbringing. From the ages of about 4 to 18, I did nothing but play with my Super Nintendo. And basically 3 different Mario games was my entire childhood. And so what we're going to talk today about is idolatry. Because I'm thinking back, and I think my Nintendo might have just been an idol in my life. Maybe just a bit. Idolatry and idols. What do we know about idols? Well, I bet you don't know the Hebrew word for idol, but you're gonna. It's called Tselem. Tselem, so it's a T-S-E-L-E-M. Tselem, okay? Ready to say it with me? Let's say it. Tselem. Again? Tselem. One more. Tselem. That is idol. And idolatry is all throughout the Bible, and it's a bad thing, right? We can all agree? Idols are bad. They're carved statues, maybe carved out of wood, representing gods or spiritual beings in some way, kind of mysterious, because we don't really do that kind of thing anymore. But they were bad. Numbers 33 talks about how God commands Israel to destroy all of the idols of Canaan. Like, we got to get rid of these things. They're bad. Okay, so that's some of the things we know about idols. In 1 Corinthians and Romans, it talks about how there's a little debate. Do we eat meat that was sacrificed to idols? And there's this question of, well, if they were sacrificed to idols, we know that the idols is just a block of wood or a block of stone. It's not really anything. And yet, Paul says maybe you should avoid eating meat sacrificed to an idol. Maybe that, just in case there is something there, maybe you should avoid it. Especially don't go into those other temples to eat the meat. So the question is, are idols anything? Are they something we should be concerned about in 2025 in America? Should we really care about idols? I'm going to ask somebody to open up their Bibles. Can somebody read for us Psalm 115, and then it'll be verses 2 through 8. So it's a little more, but anyone willing to volunteer to read that for us all? Nice and loud. Psalm 115, and then verses 2 through 8. You got it?
I got it.
Thank you. Yeah.
115, 2 through 8.
2 through 8, yep.
Why should the Gentiles say, so where is their God? But our God is in heaven. He does whatever he pleases. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of man's hands. They have mouths, but they do not speak. Eyes they have, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. Noses they have, but they do not smell. They have hands, but they do not handle. Free from feet they have, but they do not walk. Nor do they mutter through their throat. Those who make them are like them. So is everyone who trusts in them.
Thank you. That's good. So we're in first grade science lesson here. We've got eyes, ears, feet, but none of them are doing what they're supposed to do. So all throughout that psalm, we're getting this impression there's some trash talk happening to these idols, right? You've got, they're not doing anything. You want it to move, you've got to pick up the idol and you've got to move it. It's not listening to you. It doesn't see you. It can't move. It's nothing, right? And then there's that last sentence, though, that says, those who trust in the idol become like it. So there is a real serious danger. Even though the idol is nothing, there's a real danger. There's a message throughout the Bible that what you worship, you become like. If you remember, we talked about how the golden calf, they worship the golden calf, and then right after, God says, you are a stiff-necked people. He didn't just pick that word out of nowhere. He said, you're just like the calf that you worship, stiff-necked. You become like what you worship. And so in our day and age, do we have idols? I mean, you could go to parts of the world and you can, I'm sure, see carved images. But today we talk about idols of greed, idol of security. What would you give to just have a sense of security, or health, or sex, or pleasure, or power, popularity? And so this is real idolatry, because the idols were images of the gods. They were representations of these gods. And the gods represented things like the sun, or the sky, or the land, or the sea. But the gods could also represent the government. They could represent these different social structures. A god of marriage, a god of this. And so we can worship idols today. And in fact, we do quite often worship idols today. By this point, you might be wondering, are we still talking about Genesis anymore? And please tell me we're out of Genesis 1. We are not out of Genesis 1. We are still in Genesis 1. Last week, we read through the passage that said where God created humankind in His image. Do you know the Hebrew word for image? God created us in His tselem. His tselem. We aren't just the image of God. We are God's idols. We're His idols. Here's how it works. This is so fun. You want to hear something really cool? So the way that Genesis 1 is structured is set up like God is constructing His temple. Okay? So we see the sevens. Sevens are on blast throughout Genesis 1. There's the 7 days, but then all these words are repeated 7 times, or some factor of 7. So we see sevens all throughout. Well, when God gives the tabernacle blueprint in Exodus 24 on to Moses, He is doing it in 7 speeches. And they spend 7 days dedicating the temple. We're preparing for a temple in creation. In Genesis 1, it's this temple preparation of 7. And then, how does Exodus end? Exodus ends by them actually constructing the tabernacle, and the cloud of God's glory rests in the tabernacle. It moves from up on the mountain to down to the land where the people are, and it rests there. Same thing happens after the temple. The glory of God rests in the temple. And at the end of the 7 days of creation, what happens? God rests. This is this fun little hyperlink to show us that what's going on is so much more than just the physical world coming into existence, that there is a temple being made. And so what happens when all of Israel's neighbors make a temple is they will take the last pieces, the idol that they put into that temple. Well, there is no idol that God puts into His temple in Genesis 1 except for you and me and Richard and all of us. We are the idol that's put into the temple. And once a year, the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies. And there's no idol, but he actually is like the idol that actually enters the Holy of Holies in the temple. What does it mean? We are the image of God. We are God's idol. Something different. I did not know that before. And we're the idol of God. So let's do a little review. Last week we talked about how we're in the image of God and just looking at the passage and what that taught us about what it means to be in the image of God. Remember, the phrase was male and female, he created them. And male and female was mapped onto the word image. And image and male and female were right there as the same thing. So we define being in the image of God as male and female, which points to equality between the genders. It also points to the fact that we have a unity. We have many and we have one. There's a unity in humanity. And that is one way we reflect God. It points to the Trinity. The Trinity has 3 in 1. We have 2 in 1. A unity with a plurality. God has a unity with a plurality. That's why the Bible can say God is love. Because within just God had himself, there's love. Because there's a plurality. There's someone to love. And the same is true. So we are living in the image of God, I believe, when we love one another and when there's unity amidst one another. So that's one thing we learned last week. Another is that it says, God made us in his image. He said, let us make mankind in our image and let them rule. And the construction actually could be seen as for the purpose to. So we're made in the image of God in order to rule over all the land, the fish, and the birds, and all of this. We were made in the image to rule. And that says something very, very important about who God is. We gave it this word, he's a dianthropic God. You guys remember that? Dianthropic. So dia is the Greek word for through. Anthropos is the Greek word for human. He is the working through humans God. He delights that his will is done through his image bearers. He doesn't feel the need to have to do everything on his own. But at the same time, he gives us dignity. He says that they may rule. We're rulers, not slaves. The other gods will treat humans like slaves. I need this, I need that, you need to bring it to me. But Yahweh treats humans totally different. We're not slaves, we're partners with God. And one thing I didn't say last week, so if the whole plurality and unity points to the Trinity, what does this whole dianthropic God point to? A God who wants to work through humans. It's only a few steps away from the incarnation. The fact that God himself will become human and will accomplish his purposes through a human being, Jesus. We see the hints of the Trinity. These major Christian doctrines, really the heart of our faith. The hints of it are in Genesis 1. We're in Genesis 1. But we're talking about idolatry. So we learned 2 more things about idolatry. And I want to point you to one of them here. One of them here. Here we go. You see that? Okay. So this is, let me make sure I get it right. Assyrian. Oh. This pulled up. This is to get videos onto YouTube, or from YouTube. Assyrian, here we go. So Assyria conquered a nation, and they built this idol. And we see an Assyrian king, and then we see the other kings. What do you notice? What's the first thing you notice about this and how they're portrayed? Thank you. I know it's always scary saying something like that because it's kind of hard to see and you're like, I don't want. Yes, exactly. Good one. Yes, one's big, one's small. So the Assyrian king is portrayed as a giant. Where does he see giants in the Bible? Like, kind of divine, a superpowered human. This is an idol. Here's another ancient one. Can anyone guess which country this is? You might be able to tell. Egypt. So this is the sun god, Re. But then there's a Egyptian pharaoh. Kind of, sort of side by side, sort of in front of Re. And it's showing how this king comes to represent God, Re. So the idea of a human being representing God isn't strictly in the Bible. And here's one more. This is Syria, and on his clothes, his tunic, there's all this engraved writing, and what it says in one of those, because I know ancient hieroglyphics now, is dedicated to Baal. So here's another idol of a king, but it says dedicated on behalf of the god, the storm god, Baal. And so here's the thing. God created us as his idols. It's not unusual that humans would be considered as idols of God. That's not the strange part. The revolutionary part that is truly groundbreaking, that is truly history altering, is not that humans would represent God, but that all humans would represent God. That God made mankind, humanity, in his idol, in his tselem, in his image. Think about all that means for us. We take it for granted. We live in a society where human rights are just assumed. But throughout history, that has not been the case. Where do we get that idea from? That I can't hurt you and just get away with it. Let's say you have something I want, and I killed you for it. Now, if I had the money and the power and the reputation, why can't I just do that? Now, philosophers may debate and they may find other ways around it. One thing I think of is what's called the social contract theory. And it's like, let's treat each other good, because if you treat me good and I treat you good, we're all going to be better off that way. And maybe, but that's not really the case throughout history. Because throughout history, what ends up happening all the time is that there is a very small group of people who end up at the very top. The most wealthy, the most powerful. And what they do is they create these narratives and myths that say why they deserve to be on top and everyone else should be serving them. The gods had special favor on these kings. This king comes to represent this god. And that's why we should worship this king. And that's why this king gets all the honor, praise, and glory, and wealth, and power. But that's not the case with the God of Genesis 1. Because the God of Genesis 1 says we all are made in the image. We are all his idols. It's like the foundation of human rights, as far as I can see, rests on the theology and the doctrine of the image of God. We treat each other fairly. We treat each other right. We don't harm each other. Why? Because we are dealing with a fellow image bearer of God. So much of the ethics of the Sermon on the Mount, I believe, are rooted in this idea that I'm dealing with a fellow image bearer of God. It's not enough just to not murder somebody, Jesus says, but don't be angry in your heart. Why? Because you shouldn't hold contempt toward a fellow image bearer of God. It's not enough not just to commit adultery, but don't look at a woman with lust. Why? Because they're not an object for your own use. They're an image bearer of God. They're an idol of God. And so one of the things that being an idol of God points to is the fact that, maybe we say it like this, it's a democratization, or it points us toward more equality instead of those on top and then the rest of us. There's not that sort of hierarchy the same way. We're all in the image of God. And that can explain why throughout the Bible you get something really strange. You get these Israelite leaders, as we see this history of ancient Israel, their leaders are not given a pass, ever. Their failures and disappointments are on full display. The Bible is very critical of Israel's leaders, which is unusual. You don't see that because history is written by the winners. And the winners don't say how terrible they were. The winners say how great they are and how strong and mighty they are. And yet, you read throughout, we see King David. He has some bad days. Moses didn't start out too well. You see just the king, oh yeah, this king, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Let's move on. That's all we need to know about that king. How can you, so they're speaking into a world where those are the people who should just be praised and honored and given all the credit, and yet they live within the belief system that we are all in the image of God, so we're all accountable to God. There isn't just this getaway for one over another. And then here comes Jesus. Jesus enters in, and he's kind of in this no-name family, kind of, Doesn't have very much money. In fact, he alludes to being homeless. His big message is good news to the poor. He says, you want to be great? You got to be a servant to all. It's like this raising up of those at the bottom. Here's another thing that being an idol of God means for us. It means we can see sin in a different light. Maybe it's good. I grew up and sin was breaking the rules, doing wrong, not obeying God. There's a rule, you should do it. I remember as a kid I actually wrote out a rule book. I don't know, I was into it. Probably because, you grow up in church and you just kind of like, just give the people what they want. So I had all the rules. Maybe there's something about being afraid to really step out of line. You can psychoanalyze me anytime, but I had this rule book and I wrote out all the rules. But sin is more than that. Think about how sin is portrayed in the Bible. God gives them a rule. Yes, don't eat from the tree. Here's a command, here's a rule. Yes, so it is breaking the rule, but it's much more than that. And we see the hint of that when the snake asks the question. He says, did God really say you can't eat from any of the trees? He says, well, no. You can eat from all the trees, you just can't eat from this tree. And if you eat from it, you'll die. Snake says, you will not die. In fact, you're going to be like who? Like God. You eat from the tree, you're going to be like God. But they already were. The real tragedy is that they were willing to give up who they were in order to become who they already were. See, sin is forgetting our dignity as idols of God. When we worship an idol of God, what we do is we abdicate our dignity of being idols of God ourselves. So sin is not just breaking the rule, but it's distorting our own humanity. Next week, we're going to delve into that. The book of Daniel does so much to explore the idea that sin is distorting our identity and not being fully human. See, so many times we say, well, I'm only human, as if being human is like the sign of being weak or whatever. And yes, we are human, and that does mean we have limitations. But the first word on humanity means we are the idol of God. There's a dignity there. By being human, that means we actually, Jesus didn't teach us to be less human. He taught us how to be more human. When we sin, we are turning something else into the idol of God. Maybe we should explore that more, because that's a little tricky in my mind still. But this idea that if we're his idol, then we don't have reason to have images in the likeness of God. We are the image in the likeness of God. It distorts who we are. It's not just breaking the rule. It's fundamentally changing our being. So the image of God. The image of God. Let's remember that there's a unity in the image of God. That there's a responsibility in the image of God. We were made to rule, to work on his behalf. There's an equality being made in the image of God, where it's not just the kings that represent God, but it's all of us that represent God. And there's a humanity in the image of God, where if we forget that we're made in the image of God, if we forget our value and our dignity and we try to find it somewhere else, we forget what it means to be human, we lose some of ourselves. And that is a big part of what sin is. So God, we ask you right now, would you reveal to us our dignity and worth and value? God, we need to hear it this morning. God, would you show us just how valuable and priceless and sacred we are? That we are your idol statue. We are your representative, God. God, some days we need to know our worth, and we need it more than just a feeling, more than just a happy thought. God, we need to hear it from your Spirit yourself, that we are image bearers of God, that this is how you made us, that this is real, this is true, this is who we are.